All right, welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director of Laasok. Today, I'm excited to be with all of you and also recognizing this is a bit of an anxious and bittersweet moment. On the one hand, today or this evening is the beginning of Purim, which is, of course, our holiday of joy. And today's session with Rabbi Laura Rappaport will explore different models of speaking up to power as we learn in the book of Esther. I know we're all looking forward to studying with her. At the same time, it is a time of great tension. Our hearts are turned eastward, praying for a speedy end to the violence and hostilities that are happening, and holding the people of Israel and the people of the Middle East in our hearts. As we begin, I'd like to start by thanking some of the partner organizations and congregations that have sponsored this series. I'm just going to name them all because we've got a bit of a list here. I am excited to thank AMMUD, the Jews of Color Torah Academy, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and CCAR Press, Central Synagogue, Congregation B'nai Israel of Little Rock, Arkansas, Congregation Shaarey Zedek in East Lansing, Michigan, Congregation Shir Chadash of the Hudson Valley, Keshet, the Kirva Institute, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and the Union for Reform Judaism, Temple B'nai Or in Morristown, New Jersey, Temple Judea in Coral Gables, Florida, Temple Sholom in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, Tzedek Box, and finally, Women of Reform Judaism. Many of you are part of or active in one or more of these organizations, and I'm glad you're here, and we are grateful to all of these partners. I also want to thank all of those who donated to make this series possible. If you're interested in donating toward the social justice in our text series, you can just visit the site that I'll drop into the chat right now. And your contribution is not only appreciated, but crucial for helping us continue to do this work of creating inclusive, progressive Jewish learning. Okay, a couple of quick technical notes, and then I'll turn things over to Rabbi Rappaport because she's far more interesting than me. First of all, number one, we are going to ask you to stay muted during this session, except when we invite you to unmute and speak. We all know how Zoom works, so if we all talk at once, then nobody talks, nobody can hear anybody. We do intend, however, for this session to be interactive. So if you have comments or thoughts to share, please, the best thing to do is to raise your hand electronically or put them into the chat, and Rabbi Rappaport will say more about that in a little while. As I mentioned, we invite you to have your camera on if you feel comfortable. And finally, all comments in the chat do need to be pertinent to the topic at hand. Any comments that are not about what we're talking about, we're going to have to delete. And I appreciate your understanding that these things can be challenging to manage with a larger group. Okay, let me introduce our speaker, and then we're going to join in the blessing for study, and then we'll begin our study. Rabbi Laura Rappaport has a background as a pulpit rabbi, a director of congregational learning, a board-certified hospice chaplain, a director of nonprofits, an adjunct college faculty member, an innovative educator for all ages in many settings, and a mother of two. She most recently served Temple Beth Or in Coral Springs, Florida, and is now teaching Jewish studies at the Seattle Jewish Community School. Rabbi Rappaport also has a YouTube channel offering Jewish education from a Reform Jewish perspective. I'll just drop that in the chat. It is kind of fun and interesting. I checked it out earlier. Quick note, there will be a follow-up discussion led by Rabbi Emily Losman Ostrob, who's a member of the advisory committee of Laasok. That's Wednesday evening at 7:30. So if you want to talk more about what we learned today from Rabbi Rappaport, that link will be in the email that we'll send out tomorrow that will have the recording for this session. So be on the lookout for that link. Finally, let's say together the blessing for study. So if you feel comfortable, I'll ask you to unmute now and join me in this blessing. And then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Rappaport to teach us. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring holiness to our lives, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. Rabbi Rappaport, take it away.
Hi, I I see a bunch of places I have lived. I see former congregants, so it's very exciting. But even though I could do an hour of Jewish geography, we all could. I have there's a task at hand, so I will stick to that. The Book of Esther is a book from, I'm not assuming any knowledge here, so if it's either a review or it's new. So this is our I blurred it. This is our Jewish Bible called the Tanakh because there's three, can't really see it with the blur. And the Book of Esther is in the third section of our Jewish Bible called Ketuvim, and that's where you find the Book of Esther. It is also often known as the Scroll of Esther, or megillah, which is the Hebrew word for scroll, or Megillat Esther. So you will hear it referred in all those ways. They're all correct. So biblical Book of Esther is traditionally read on the festival of Purim, which begins tonight. Esther is very clearly a book that is meant to be physically acted out in a setting in which we have been drinking, in which there's kind of a burlesque, risque kind of atmosphere. There's a lot of slapstick in it, sexual innuendo. It's not only a fun book, however, and it certainly is. There is so much in it. I think we could do a session on Esther every month of the year, and we just keep fleshing it out. Now, what does add a little more substance to this barroom melodrama is the piece that any Jewish audience at any time in history can relate to: the experience of being a religious minority in living within a larger culture that we feel could turn on us at any time. So I don't want to say we're especially feeling this now, because honestly, this is what we've always felt throughout history, almost always. So it's always, unfortunately, a very topical holiday. So part of what I want us to explore together today is, how does one function and survive, if not thrive, in such a state of perpetual helplessness? When do we push? When do we simply silently suck up the injustice that's around us? When do we stand up? And for what reason? And when is it worth it? And is it always worth it? And, these are always really interesting questions, and we can take them in many directions with the Book of Esther. Book of Esther addresses all these questions and more. And this is how I've structured our hour. I have chosen 3 characters within the Book of Esther. We're going to focus just on those 3 characters. One is Queen Vashti. Now, Queen Vashti is not a Jew, but she is a woman in an extremely patriarchal society. Number 2, Mordechai, who is a Jew, and Queen Esther, not originally a queen, becomes a queen over the course of the book, and she is also a Jew. So I'm going to be posing questions to you about each section of the book. And we're just going to jump in here with Vashti. Let me share, and there we go. So these are the questions. So I want to give you the questions ahead of time. What I did was I pulled out pieces of the Book of Esther. I'm going to read through them rather rapidly so we can get to the questions, but these are the questions we'll be looking at for this section. What was Queen Vashti's action? What was her intention? What was the result? Was anything accomplished? And what was accomplished? Okay, so here we go on the text. Maybe not. Here we go. Okay, from chapter 1. It happened in the days, and just a note on the names, these are Persian names. I do not speak Persian. I don't know how they were originally pronounced. There's a Hebrew way to pronounce them. There's an English way to pronounce them, whatever. I'll just say whatever comes out, which is probably my Ashkenazi Yiddish background that I have. That's usually what comes out. Okay. It happened in the days of Ahasuerus, that Ahasuerus, who reigned over, let me just move this, 127 provinces from India to Kush in the fortress Shushan. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his service. For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress of Shushan, high and low alike. Wine was in abundance, as befits a king, in golden beakers, like Love is Blind. If anyone watches Love is Blind, they used golden beakers of varied design. And the rule for the drinking was no restrictions. For the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. On the 7th day, when the king, sorry, I just have to move my thing keeps getting in the way here. Let me make it small. Okay. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, you're getting the sense of who this king is. He's probably someone who inherited this position, and he's just a party boy. I mean, that's all he is. There's nothing more to him than that. Okay. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal crown. In other words, and nothing else is implied, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti, for some reason, refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. Well, the king didn't know what to do, of course, because he never does. He consulted the sages, and he said, what should be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Thereupon, Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense, not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and all the peoples and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come for some reason, to dance naked around a bunch of drunken people. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will, I can't, that word's covered up. You'll have to read it on your own. To all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you. Let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who's more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm. Vast though it is, all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in his own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. So, once again, patriarchy reigns. Okay, now I have... sorry, now I've gotten, here it is. I lost all of you guys. Okay, you are back. Nope. Sorry. Okay, Micah, I think, nope. Okay, can everyone see? For some reason, I'm having trouble seeing.
We can see you.
Okay. Yeah, now I got it. There's all these settings, all these lovely settings. Okay, so now I'm opening it up to you. These questions are all interrelated, by the way. You don't have to say I'm answering number 3, but basically, Vashti just went against the ruling power. What do you think of this? Why did she do this? Do you agree she should have done this? Should she have done something else? Was anything accomplished? What are your feelings about how Vashti just behaved? So you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand, and Micah is going to do the hand raising piece.
All right. So I see. Do you want me to start calling on people, Rabbi?
Yeah, because now I'm having trouble getting the chat back up on
All right. So let's go to Sabrina.
Okay.
And Rabbi Rappaport, if you stop your share, you'll probably be able to see everything better for now.
Okay. Let's do that. Just remember what the questions are. Now I see the chat. Hello, everyone. Okay. So Sabrina was going to share.
Yeah, it's so ironic that Vashti is criticized for not respecting her husband, where the husband showed complete disrespect of her by asking her to come naked in front of everybody.
I think, okay, everyone reads every text uniquely. I see this whole thing as so absurd that obviously when I tend to act these out with like puppets and stuffed animals when I teach it to like children or whatever, to children, it's almost like a joke because it was such a stupid request to make of a queen. Like clearly a queen is not going to do this. It's crazy. And the fact that they respond like in such an over the top, okay, no woman can ever say go against her husband. To me, it just plays out. This is my perception as complete parody that like, no, of course she's not going to do it. And of course not every woman is going to just listen to everything her husband says from now on. Like none of this is going to happen. It's like them trying to be like, oh, we're so important. We're going to make sure everyone, like it, to me, it makes them look stupid and not Vashti. But I think it's still, even though it's humor, it still represents the fact that there are times where maybe somebody speaks up to power and it's going to end badly. And yet you might feel it's still worth doing.
So I see lots of hands. Let's go to, in this order, Paula, Emilio, Jerry, DB, and then Bob.
Okay, and then we're going to have to move to the next section. I'm sorry, because we have so little time. Okay, go.
So short comments, please, everyone.
Okay. So it's really, I agree with you that this is an obvious setup. And, here's been a 6-month rager going on, with everybody drunk all over the place. And,
yes.
So it's totally understandable. But I see it also as a literary device to not only did it open the door for Esther to come in, but it did it with high stakes. So we all know what happened to the last queen, right? And so for Esther to come in on that foundation and to do what she eventually did, it ups the ante of how brave she was. So I like the setup.
That's a great point. It's a good literary setup. Absolutely.
Emilio.
Hi everyone, Emilio here. I just find it hilarious, I just find it like a megillah. So it's funny that she stood up to power and did what she had to do. And that's it. Thank you.
We're at Jerry.
Hi, Rabbi Rappaport. Good to see you again. So, we certainly know from Saturday Night Live and other parodies in our own time that there's a vein of truth running through the parody. So I would presume that whoever wrote the Book of Esther, saw some of this behavior going on and was there must have been something specific behind the parody that developed.
Mm-hmm. I think what's behind it is what is universal and true throughout time, that people see people in power who think they're incredibly important and brilliant, and they mostly seem like a bunch of bumbling idiots, and I think that's kind of the experience that's being parodied. I like the comparison to SNL. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. I think Esther is very similar to SNL in that SNL has presented over time, over the last number of decades, political satire through humor. And that's how I love SNL. I love the Book of Esther. There's a connection, obviously. Okay, next up.
We got DB and then Bob.
Yeah, I was just wondering why it's so important to the rabbi, since the text doesn't say that she was naked, why it's so important for the rabbis to insert that. Because I get that it's hyperbole and a literary device, but wouldn't it be even more powerful if we just took the plain meaning of the text and she was clothed and wore a crown? Because usually abuse of power isn't so, like, it's more subtle than that. So I'm just curious why it was so important to the rabbis to make her naked.
I think from context, it seems like that's very strongly implied. These are a bunch of men who have been drinking for days, and a leader who's just a party boy. And I feel like in that context, I think that's a pretty realistic interpretation of kind of what was, if not totally naked, then, scantily dressed in a way that would be demeaning to her.
All right, and Bob, last word on this.
We think that we're in a modern era in the Me Too world and all that, but this clearly shows that the same views that we hold today were held by many folks way back when, many thousands of years ago. Nothing new under the sun.
Absolutely. And human beings have not changed one bit. We think we're much smarter than they were 2,000 years ago. We are absolutely not. Okay, on to Mordechai. Here we go. Share. Okay, and next. Okay, these are the questions that will be about Mordechai, which are the same questions. What was Mordechai's action? What was his intention? What was the result? What was something accomplished? You may see, and I'm going to have to read really fast, you may see that it's not exactly the way you've probably heard the story in religious school in terms of Mordechai in the actual book doesn't really tell us why he does what he does. We have to sort of read between the lines. Okay. This is from chapter 3. Sometime later, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Haman. Oh, and I have some cool mezuzahs here. Oh, probably with a little Haman grogger here. Okay. He advanced him. He seated him higher than any of the fellow officials. All the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordechai would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gate said to Mordechai, "Why do you disobey the king's order?" When they spoke to him day after day, kind of seems like something's missing there, doesn't it? There's nothing missing. This is exactly, I didn't leave anything out. This is how it is. When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, so Mordechai never answers that question. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordechai's resolve would prevail, for he had explained to them that he was a Jew. Okay, so that's really all we know about why Mordechai is doing this. It has something to do with him being a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone. Having been told who Mordechai's people were, Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordechai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, which means the lot, and Purim means lots, which is kind of like dice, like just like chance, like the rolling of the dice is going to determine everything, just luck, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month until it fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. And Haman then said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm whose laws are different from those of any other people and who do not obey the king's laws. And it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury. The king couldn't have cared less. Whatever, who cares? Just keep the booze flowing. Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, the foe of the Jews, and the king said, the money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit. Just bring the parties on. I don't care. On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned, and a decree was issued, as Haman directed, to all these important people in the province, and it was sealed with the king's signet. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by courtiers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to massacre, to exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed in every single province, to be publicly displayed to all the peoples, so they will be ready for that day. The courtiers went out post-haste on the royal mission, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to feast. Because what else do you do after you put out execution orders for a genocide? You sit down and have a drunken dinner. Yay. But the city of Shushan was dumbfounded. And here we go, talking about Mordechai. So what did Mordechai do? Do you feel the same way about Mordechai you do about Vashti? This is a tough one, I think. I think this is a tough dilemma. What he did, I'm not going to share anymore. I'm going to leave it open to you guys. And, what are your opinions of Mordechai's action? What do you think? I see in the chat, while we're looking at hand raising, he refused to kowtow. Yes, he did. There's always a price to be paid. Do you think about the price? Do you not think about the price? I mean, this is a dilemma. This is a daily dilemma throughout time. It's a human dilemma. When do you can't like never, ever kowtow ever, or that's not going to work out for you. How do you make the decision? Anyone want to?
I have a comment, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, we don't exactly know why Mordechai does what he does. So some of it is dependent on why he does what he does, but it tells us that he was Jewish, right? So that it has something to do with him being a Jew. So we could understand that as religious piety, although I'm hesitant to understand it that way because it's the book of Esther. But it seems to me that somehow Vashti is somehow responding to a matter of sort of like personal honor. She doesn't want to be on display, where Mordechai is somehow acting out of, I don't know, like whether it's piety or whether if it's like philosophy or something about his national identity that causes him to behave in a different way.
Yeah, yes. And I'm looking in the chat. Mordechai was a learned Jew who obeyed only God. Maybe there's nothing in the story to tell us that. That is how he's been, portrayed by his PR team over the centuries, which are the rabbis. They have they've painted this picture of this person, but he's a guy who told Esther, hey, go marry the king, the non-Jewish party boy king. Who knows who Mordechai was? There's a comment. I thought he would not bow down. He looked upon Haman as Haman putting himself out as like a god. I mean, I will say that Jews are allowed to bow in situations that call for bowing, and it doesn't mean you're doing idolatry. Like if I met I was going to say queen, if I met the king of England, I assume it would be etiquette for me to bow. That doesn't mean I'm worshiping him. That's just, that's just being respectful. We don't know. I mean, that's why I think it probably has something, again, this is my theory. It has something to do with the values, that Haman was such a bad person that Mordechai felt his Jewish values didn't really, it was too much of a conflict to bow out of respect to someone who he had no respect for. Anyway, that's my personal theory. I see there are hands up. So Mike, I'll let you call on them.
Yeah, so I'm going to prioritize those who haven't spoken yet. So let's go to Vicky and then Bob. And then if we have time, we'll go to Emilio.
Mordecai refused to bow to the king.
No, to Haman.
To Haman. Oh, well, but Haman put the bug in the king's ear to do away with the Jews. So the king obviously didn't think of it on his own. So did Mordecai really know that this would happen? I don't know.
Right. And can he be blamed? Can we blame him? I think, it's a good, it's a good point. Can we blame him for what the disaster that then followed? Could he reasonably be held responsible? Is it just so crazy to think, because I'm not personally bowing, all the Jews are going to be killed? I don't know. Maybe that's just how things happen in a crazy, we're sort of living it now, in a crazy world where there doesn't seem to be any rule of law, who the heck knows? I don't know. I think that's open for discussion. I think it could go either way. You could argue either way. Either, he probably should have thought about when he's telling everybody I'm a Jew and I'm not bowing, what ramifications is that going to have? Or maybe he just felt, I need to make a statement. And then here's another the questions just keep coming. And then I have to think, did he have the right to do that? And this is true of all of us. Like, all of us as Jews who live as minority within like a much larger culture, whenever we do or say anything and it's known that we're Jewish, do we have maybe an extra responsibility? Because people are not necessarily just going to say, that's Laura saying this. They're going to be like, that's the Jew saying this. That's another question that comes up. Do we have a greater responsibility to be very discerning and careful with what we say, because people are going to, because we know human nature, whether or not it's a good thing, they're going to say, that's what this Jew said or did. We all see what's going on with the Epstein files, how much incredible, hateful, crazy anti-Semitism is coming out of that, that he doesn't just represent him, he represents Judaism. So, it's all here in the book of Esther. Not that anyone did not that Mordechai did anything negative, just the fact that he's telling everyone he's a Jew, he's doing this really politically risky thing. Okay, we'll move on.
Do you want to take one last comment?
Sure.
So let's go to Bob.
So I was thinking exactly off of your statement, open for discussion, that all the valuable teachings leave everything open, suggest, but don't really necessarily define. You don't have full context ever. So in this situation, we have more context about the maniac kind of king, but nothing about Vashti in terms of, well, what's the backstory? Has she already gotten herself in big trouble and he's now using this? Who knows? And we don't know that much about Mordecai. Was he a very learned guy? Was he now standing up for the Jewish people? We don't know. And so I think that's what this is valuable for, is that it leaves it open so that it does beg all of this kind of interaction around this complex issue. And I think that's the value.
I agree.
What did they do? Doesn't really matter what the backstory is. It's kind of like everybody can relate to this situation, I think.
Yeah, yes, agreed. And the questions to me are the most interesting thing. Like, I don't need them answered definitively because we're never going to do that. We're always going to disagree. They're just interesting questions. Phoebe mentioned, or did he have an obligation to stand up to immoral use of power? If we're going to say we're Jewish, we should stand up for Jewish values. I mean, that's a very valid point. It's not the only viewpoint, but it's absolutely a very valid point that, where the rubber meets the road is, are we willing to suffer some consequences for doing good, or are we only willing to do good when we know it's going to end well for us? I think what's interesting with Mordechai, though, is it went beyond, like, if Mordechai's like, I'm just going to say I'm not going to bow, and if they put me to death, they put me to death. Okay, but now he's gotten every single Jew in trouble and they didn't get to vote on whether they wanted this, this value to be expressed. Maybe he couldn't have foreseen that. I don't know. But I just bring it up that as individual Jews, we always have to know whether it's unfair or not. And it is unfair, just like really any other minority group. We're not alone in this. When we say or do something, suddenly we're doing this or saying this on behalf of all Jews. Again, it's not fair, but that's the world we live in. Okay, we have one more character to get to, and that is Esther, the actual hero, main character of our story. Let me get to this. Share. Okay, and make this small so I can see. Okay. Here are the questions I'm going to have at the end for Esther. What was her concern? What were the constraints and risks she faced? What advantages did she have? How would you describe her approach to creating change, and what were her successes? Okay, chapter 4. When Mordechai learned all that had happened, Mordechai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes. These are all signs of mourning in Jewish tradition. He went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate, for one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. Just a law. Okay. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, as you can imagine, fasting, weeping, wailing. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordechai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused to take off his sackcloth. Again, don't know why that either. Okay. Thereupon, Esther summoned Hatach, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordechai to learn the why and wherefore. So they go back, the messenger just goes back and forth between the two of them. Hatach went out to Mordechai. Mordechai told him everything that happened about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He gave him here's the law that's proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. Please show this to Esther, inform her, charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and plead with him for her people. So Hatach, came and delivered Mordechai's message to Esther. Esther told Hatach, take to Mordechai the following reply. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know, if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law: to be put to death. Only if the king extends his golden scepter to him, may he live. Now, I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. When Mordechai was told what Esther had said, Mordechai had this message delivered. And I put this in bold because it's a pretty well-known little snippet from the book of Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. Okay, so that's one piece. Don't think, oh, I'm an important Jew. None of this stuff's going to touch me. We know throughout history how well that goes. Then here's the second part. Who knows? Maybe you came to a royal position for such a time as this, which you kind of have to imagine Mordechai was sort of thinking this when he pushed Esther to, hey, you should try out to be the queen. You know, you have to imagine what then came out of his mouth is, you know, it can't hurt to have a Jew in a high place. Oh, whoops. Okay, then Esther sent this back, this answer to Mordechai. Go assemble all the Jews, fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it's contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. So remember, the law was you can't just come in and say, hi, king. You know, the king has to call you. So Mordechai went about the city and he did just as Esther had told him. Next chapter, on the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood, so didn't go into the throne room, stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the palace while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, facing the entrance of the palace. So she's just standing there. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. Okay, this is such clearly obvious sexual imagery here. If you've never noticed this, it's very obvious. The king is holding his golden scepter, which is a golden rod with a ball on the top. He extended to Esther the golden scepter, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Okay, that got a big laugh in the bar room where this was being performed, clearly. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be granted you. I mean, he just sounds like he's always drunk, which I'm sure he is. Again, this is just, this king is not evil. He's just a party boy. He's empty-headed. He's just a party boy. And he picked, of course, because he has no judgment, this horrible person to run everything. Okay. What blah, 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 blah. If it please your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast I have prepared. The king commanded, tell Haman to go, hurry, do Esther's bidding. So they came to the feast. And on the second day of the feast, because his parties go on for days, the king again asked Esther, oh, what is your wish, Queen Esther? Even to half your kingdom, I'll give it to you. And Queen Esther replied, if your majesty, like in her little Esther, in her little voice, you can just see it in the words. If your majesty will do me the favor, and if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish and my people as my request, for we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. If we had only been sold as indentured servants, I would not have bothered you at all. Fine, we are happy to be enslaved, but being killed, I just feel it's a little much. Okay, so that's what she's saying. Therefore, the king said, who is he? Who dared to do this? Well, next to them right now is Haman sweating up a storm. The adversary and enemy is this evil Haman. So, okay, I skipped a bunch, but they end up, the bottom line, they impale Haman on the stake he had put up for Mordechai. And then at the end, Mordechai the Jew ranked next to King Ahasuerus. So instead of Haman, Mordechai became the guy and all the Jews loved him. And that's all, folks. Okay, the end. So remember, questions. what was Esther's, what was her truth that she had to speak? I don't like to say that, but what was her, what did she need to say to power? What constraints did she have? What risks did she face? What advantages? Was her approach different from the others? Okay, so let me stop sharing so I can see you all again. And
So should we start with Emilio?
Sure.
Hi everyone, Emilio here. I think Esther was just playing in the satire, just doing what she had to do and like making everyone laugh and have a good time.
Okay, and so you want to say any more about that? I mean, that is what she did. She's like, oh, let's have, please, King, like, can you please come to my party? She actually does it twice. I edited it. And then at the first party, she's like, oh, sir, I have a favor to ask you. Will you come to another party next week? Sure. So then, there's another party. And then she goes through oh, please, like, I wouldn't mind if we were just enslaved, but I'd rather if I wasn't murdered. Is that okay? I mean, it's her whole shtick, and she succeeded.
I think she does a good job, She takes the king out for a nice meal with his the mitzvah.
So let's go to Aviva.
Isn't she worried that, like, she's worried because, because she's going into the king's, like, sort of the inner sanctum of the palace where people aren't allowed to go unless they're beckoned, sort of.
Mhm.
And she's sort of like inviting herself.
Right.
And then she's nervous about that. She's nervous about admitting she's Jewish and whether the king knew that before he married her or not. And then she's having the king and Haman over, and then to reveal sort of Haman's plot and story. So she's sort of nervous about how the king's going to respond to all this, being that Haman is sort of his respected sort of second in command.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there were a number of risks she was taking that she did not know how they were going to turn out. So while it's easy to just see her as being like, the little damsel in distress, it was actually a lot more dangerous than that. I don't know if that was what you were, I mean, yeah.
I have a comment also, if it's okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And look, there's the verse that we no longer have it on our screen, but I pulled it up on my screen here. What Mordechai says to Esther is really interesting. He says, do not imagine that you of all Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace.
Yep.
And then he says, on the contrary, if you keep silent, then deliverance will come from another quarter. And who knows, maybe you've attained to a royal position for just such a crisis. So in other words, there's a message here about it's essentially what I like to call the Spider-Man theory of religion, that with great power comes great responsibility, right? Esther, you don't get to think that because you are privileged, that privilege is just privilege. Privilege, and somebody said in the chat, privilege is always responsibility. If you don't use it, God will find some other way to bring, goodness, to bring deliverance into the world. But that's why you're here. You were put in a privileged position and you need to use it. And so Esther, yes, she's reticent, and Aviva points out all the ways she's reticent, but Esther rises to the task of understanding that her power must be transformed into responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have some questions about the whole thing, I'm going to put on the screen. It's noisy in this part of the school. Okay, share. Okay. How did, wait a minute. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm moving stuff out of the way. Okay. How did each character speak up to power? We're not going to have time to get to all of these, but just if any of them interest you. How did each character speak up to power? Each situation was different. It wasn't like they all reacted differently to the same situation, not at all. They all had different situations they were dealing with. Who does each person represent in our modern world? What does each character's approach achieve? Do we need all types of personalities and approaches to create change? Why or why not? And one thing that motivated this question for me is I know what my strengths are and I know what I'm not so strong at, or maybe just it's not my style. So certain types of speaking out are going to come much more naturally to me. Maybe they're good in some circumstances. Maybe they're good in all circumstances. I mean, just everything is open-ended. Is one approach best? Does it depend upon the situation? Does it depend upon the culture, the type of change needed? You know, these are just all questions that are not only prompted by the Book of Esther, but that face us every day in all kinds of things going on in our world. And how, you know, what approach do we take? Do we strategize about what's exactly needed here? Or, you know, what I've seen in my lifetime is change often happens from very different types of personalities and maybe even organizations doing their thing in their very unique way. And it's almost like if you approach things from all different, you know, some people are more quiet inside the system changers. Some people are more in your face outside the system changers. Maybe it takes all of them. So these are all questions on the table. I'm going to stop the share. And Micah, if you want to call on people.
Yep. So we've got Paula and then Evan, because you haven't spoken yet. And if we have time, we'll go to Aviva.
So I think it's really interesting when you look at it. Vashti was just refused, and that was very ineffective. Mordecai was confrontational, and that actually created a greater threat to everybody else. And Esther used something that in business you call leading from, managing up, somebody who actually influences the person above them in a way that the person doesn't even know they're being influenced, which is a very feminine way of leadership. And so, yay, Esther, it worked.
It did. I have to just like personal sharing. I have to say the style that comes to me most naturally is Vashti. And I'm now old enough that I can look back at my life and I know that, it screwed me over a number of times. Would I ever do it again differently? Absolutely not. So sometimes it's not really about accomplishing something. Sometimes it's just, I have to speak up about this. And is it going to screw me? Yeah. But too bad. I have to. So I kind of see Vashti that way. My heart is kind of with her because I see myself in her. But we can't only have Vashtis because, as you said, Esther saved every Jew in Persia by being who she is. And I mean, that's a pretty important goal. A lot of people's lives were spared because of her. So that's another thing is maybe for us to sometimes think, maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental of this other person who's maybe a little more of a kiss up, because maybe they're accomplishing some things that maybe I couldn't do with my approach. I mean, that might be another interesting lesson out of the Book of Esther. Okay, we'll move on.
So let's go to Evan.
So a couple of things came to my mind. One is, by the way, there's not a one size fits all. So I really believe that different situations will call for different actions, and there's a lot of personalities and potential outcomes and consequences of choosing the right behavior. But one of the things that came to my mind was with Mordechai was about October 7th. And so what I saw on October 7th, I think at a really high level, Jewish people, Jews in general were faced, well, I say Jews in the US, and I'll speak about Jews from New York, because that's what I kind of see, or the tri-state area, was that there was a choice that people had. One was take down the mezuzahs, hide the Stars of David, do things that made you blend in and not call out being Jewish, because that was a little risky. And there were other people that wore yellow ribbons, prominently displayed mezuzahs and things, and put up signs in the windows, and returned or continued to show up in synagogue, whether online or in person, in great droves. And so that was a choice they had to make. And, that kind of reminds me of Mordechai there when we say, did he do the right thing? Should he have put his head in the sand or should he have stood up? He chose to stand up. And that to me sounds like a good thing. He also, I think, tried to influence Esther in the same thing by basically saying, you think you're going to be okay if you stick your head in the sand. That's probably not going to be very effective because it's going to come at you from sometime. So I liked how he encouraged her. But by the way, she heeded the call and took action. So she did it, but he at least influenced her. So yes, it's very hard and there's a lot of different ways to go. But that's some of the things that jump out at me as I relate it to modern day. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll take the next comment.
So we're down to our last 2 minutes. So let's have very short comments. Aviva and Jerry, and then Rabbi Rappaport, you can close us up.
Okay.
One of you is about.
My thing is seeing how each of the people's ways of handling it was reflected in the Holocaust. And so maybe Mordechai, a more pious Jew, would have hidden in Auschwitz or something and hidden behind his, but like how and then I'm also thinking how, like, I worked at Beit, which was a Jewish hospital nursing home in Toronto. So I'm thinking of how we modified our care to modify it to Holocaust survivors. So how it would affect someone like Vashti or Mordechai or Esther, and how you need to, how their actions would reflect on everybody else, and how they're like Vashti might say no and then just walk away.
Thanks, Aviva. So I'm going to have to cut you off, Aviva, because we're at our time. Let's go to Jerry for one short last comment, please.
When I was growing up, it was very common for my parents to say something happened, and my parents would say it's a shanda for the Jews, meaning that, whatever some Jewish person did reflected on the whole community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is true, but I also think it's true for many other communities. If you can identify a specific community in a culture, then they can be singled out in some way. And we all have to not just Jewish people. We all have to, I think, deal with that and that feeling of, being unfairly marked, criticized, responsible for something that we really aren't responsible for.
Yes. And I also see in the comments something about the Greek version of Esther. That's fascinating. And I have no time to talk about it, but the Greek version does add much more piety and traditional Jewish stuff in it to Esther and Mordechai that are fascinating. Okay, so closing thoughts. The Book of Esther is a biblical book, not because of its lofty theology, but because it uses bawdy, barroom humor to portray a relatable experience that Jews know extremely well. The experience of being a minority within a larger culture that is often hostile. How do we assert ourselves? How do we advocate for ourselves and even advocate for others who are being oppressed within such a system? And I see the Book of Esther, maybe not, I wrote offers several possibilities, but I think it offers a lot of questions that are fascinating. And, if I'm going to take one takeaway from the Book of Esther, maybe that it takes all kinds of personalities to change a society, and each of us has an approach that maybe is most comfortable for us. And I'm thankful for the other types of people with other approaches. Anyway, I'll leave it at that because there's so much more we could say, but hopefully it gave you some interesting food for thought.
A huge thank you to Rabbi Laura Rappaport for this really interesting discussion, and to all of you, everyone who was here, everyone who participated, everyone who donated. We will see each other again for the next installment of our Social Justice in Our Texts series on Thursday, April 23rd. That is a date change. It's moved from Monday to Thursday, April 23rd. That's with Rabbi Barry Block. And the session is called What We Leave for the Poor. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy Purim, and we will see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.